Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so this is your last flip to send A and D period off into their nice long Easter Holy Week break. And this is, I guess, if you're my F period, welcome back from Holy Week break, right? So we are now starting your next unit. Now, I personally love this unit in particular. It's probably one of my more expertise kind of situations because I've studied World War I. I'm a very, very big fan of the 20th century, and we're moving into a period now that I know a lot of different stuff about. So I expect to be able to teach you a lot of stuff about. We're going back to another unit that's full of people and a lot of different historical figures. But what we're trying to get at today is we're just kind of trying to set the stage, all right? Because I don't want to get into a lot of super in-depth stuff right before break for A and D, just like I don't want to get into a lot of big stuff for F period coming back from break, okay? So we are getting now into, though, a period that you could say is like the death of old Western civilization and a rise of modern Western civilizations. God, my hair is so gross. It needs to be cut. Anyway, but what we're getting into is we're going to kind of just set the stage for World War I. We're going to talk about the nuts and bolts. We're going to talk about the countries involved, the people leading them, and some major themes, okay? So, and I'll give you some guidance with some little on-screen prompts and stuff like that, letting you know how your notes should look and stuff like that. But let's go ahead and get a new section of notes started out. So after you've done the warm-up and stuff, and you can kind of see how little you probably know about World War I getting into it, most people don't know a lot about it. Most people see it as a very, very foreign thing. They see it as either being super close to World War II in time or crazy far away. When actually they're about only 20 years apart-ish, so it's a decent chunk of time apart. And there's a lot of major themes that we're going to need to connect because World War I leads straight into World War II and other things like that. So we need to go ahead and give this unit a title, okay? So go ahead and in your notes, real big at the top of the margin, Unit 10, okay? Unit 10, Europe in chaos. All right, we're going to be talking about just the absolutely chaotic 20th century or start to the 20th century and how even things as simple as art were a measuring stick of how crazy life was getting, right? So getting into it though, what you need to know is that we're moving into the death of this old and we're rising into the modern period. Now, I could spend all day talking to you about this stuff that I talked about with the honors kids, about the trends in art and dance that went on and the different types of music and the progressions of art going through this whole thing. But I'm not going to do that because I think it's just going to confuse you. I could also talk about the growth of science and intelligence and how Marie Curie, being the only person to ever win 4 Nobel Prizes, and she is still the only person to hold that record, and she is still really awesome, and she did a lot of great things. And this is her picture right here. Marie Curie discovered radioactivity in the late 1800s. You got the Sigmund Freud popping up with the birth of psychology. You even got, look at young Albert Einstein doing great things, okay? But here's the thing about it. I don't need you to write any of that stuff down because I'm not going to ask you about it because those are AP concepts that you're probably just not really quite ready to handle moving into a study of a war that needs to be studied more by regular everyday people so the heritage of the people that fought in it and the relationship to it doesn't ever die out. But we can give you a little spoon, a little tablespoon of some stuff, right? So what you need to understand is that the art of the 20th century was kind of like a reflection of the changing world post-industrial, okay? So, and what I mean by that is we went in the last unit, in Unit 9, we went from a world that had 0 factories to factories everywhere. You've got industrial life on the boom and how that's going to rapidly change everything, and you're going to see the growth of these isms. Well, art was kind of a physical representation of that. Right? So to give you a little tiny, little itty-bitty little thing, little just tiny little bit into it, art was starting to look like this in the 20th century. It originally looked like... Okay, keep going backwards. Art originally looked like this. It was all hyper-realistic, and you saw, architecture, grandiose themes, and beautiful imagery. But then as the centuries begin to progress on, art ends up coming out looking like a lot less realistic, and it just keeps going through all these different trends, and it moves towards abstraction, and that's Pablo Picasso in the very, very beginning of the 20th century. This is his picture called Man with Guitar. Do you see the guitar? Now, ironically enough, I love this picture. This is during his Cubism era. And as you can see, like, Europe's just getting kind of out of sorts, right? This is another very famous one that a lot of y'all know very well, the Scream, right? It's moving towards abstraction. It's moving towards a lot of very, very odd themes, different looks, and this was considered high culture art during the early 20th century, right before the outbreak of World War I. And so with that, you're seeing that the industrial era has created more artists. It's created more art buyers because of the middle class rising up, which means that economies are expanding, right? So we've got expanded economics. You've got women entering the workplace now, right? You've got children entering the workplace. You've got family structure changing because you don't need to have a buttload of kids anymore to help you work on a feudal era farm. You need a few kids now because you don't want to feed all those mouths anymore because industrialism has changed everything. But it is growing economies and making countries fabulously, fabulously wealthy, okay? So as you can see, art is a reflection of that growth in industrial economics. Science and philosophy are believing to break natural beliefs. Just to kind of slide back to this slide real quick, just to give you some ideas. You don't need to write any of this stuff down, but it's just imagery to understand. Science in the 20th century, so going from the 1800s into the 1900s, changed the game. Because there were a couple of beliefs that people had in the 1800s about the world around them. And a few of those beliefs include the following things. 1, atoms are solid and they make up the whole world. They can't be split, they don't die, and matter is never created or destroyed. Newton came up with that in the scientific revolution in his laws of the conservation of mass and energy. But Marie Curie right here, a Polish female scientist, discovered what radiation and radioactivity breakdown of molecules are, right? So, now she didn't invent X-rays. That was a guy named Rothenberg. Rothenberg actually invented X-rays. And you have to understand, it's not Rothenberg. Rothenberg is a plow. Hold on. I gotta look this up. Give me a second. But anyway, what Marie Curie did do is she discovered that atoms are actually constantly in flux. That radioactivity shows that they're breaking down, that the movement of electrons and protons and the degradation of one atom into another atom and different compounds being mixed together. Roentgen, whatever his name was, yeah. Like, Roentgen discovered these things called X-rays, and they called them X-rays because they didn't know what they were, right? They didn't know what this radiation was, and what do you do when you're solving a problem in algebra? You put an X there, right? Because it's a variable that you don't understand or know. So, like, Rotenberg discovered these things, but Marie Curie is going to give it a name, and she's going to be like, oh, it's radioactive, and it's degrading. So atoms aren't perfect little things. They can be split, they can be changed, they can be destroyed. And then another little Swiss patent clerk right here in 1905 by the name of Albert Einstein comes up with this idea that, oh, the only physical constant in the universe is light. Everything else is up for debate. And people's faces are just melting off right now, and they're like, what do you mean? All the stuff I learned in school, you're messing with my brain. And then speaking of messing with your brain, Sigmund Freud shows up and completely breaks down the understanding of the human mind and how it interprets the world around them. And how there are people with mental disabilities, and we can use things like the talking cure to balance out their id, their ego, their superego, and find ways to cure them. Like, as you can see, the world of science dramatically changed, leading to people breaking all of these ideas, and this is going to freak people out because they're going to be like, what are you talking about? All the stuff that I thought I knew doesn't exist and isn't true anymore. And then in the 1800s, you saw working men voting in larger numbers, right? Because of these revolutions of 1848, more men are voting and have more of a say in their government. You got legislative branches popping up all over the place. You got small baby revolutions breaking out in the 1800s. You've got gender roles changing and family structure changing, like we were just talking about. So all this craziness, expanded economics, science and philosophy changing, and the tearing down of political structure and the changing of family dynamic is going to have a lot of massive effects on the people of Europe, the regular people of Europe. And it's going to lead to things like disorientation, dislocation, resentment against your quote-unquote enemies, and we'll talk about who those enemies are here in a second, and fear, just outright fear. You know, like, people are just afraid. They are like, I don't know what to believe anymore. Because, look, you got to understand, Europe is ripening for war by the beginning of the 1900s. Like, in the early 1900s, Europe is ready for it. They want it. They think it makes sense. Like, it's like, that's scary. It's freaky. Like, and it's a very crazy, intense time. Because as you can see with the art, things are different now. Everything has changed. The 1800s created a maelstrom of just difference, right? Like, science is broken. My mind, according to Freud, is broken. Like, everything has changed. So Europe's ripening for war in a big way. And let's also not be obnoxious. Let's not pretend like Europe wasn't violent leading into this war in the first place, right? There was an extreme amount of violence prevalent before World War I. A lot of history teachers will just be like, and then Napoleon, he got exiled, and then 100 years later, World War I. Like, I mean, like, there's a lot of stuff that we've talked about, as you can see, that happened in the middle of that. Like the rise of the isms and the revolutions of 1848 and all these other crazy things. But violence was still very, 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 very much a thing. It's almost like Europe was already at war when World War I finally broke out, but it's just that Europe wasn't at war with itself, all right? So it was at war with everybody else. Because, like, strikes and protests were still very much a thing in the early 19th or in the early 20th century in early 1900s Europe. Strikes and protests for workers' rights and feminists protesting because they wanted the right to vote were oftentimes destroyed by conservative and liberal governments with violent tactics, turning the police on them, firing into crowds, like doing a lot of other crazy things. The assassination of political public figures was wildly big, okay? The assassinations of political figures was huge. Like, it was almost like it was a trend. All the cool kids were doing it. This guy right here, that's Alexander II of Russia, the Tsar of Russia. He got blown up while he was on his way to a military ceremony because the people that blew him up were like, government's bad. And they were just anarchists. The Queen of Austria, Sisi, actually, I went and saw her whole house and stuff when I went to Austria with my wife. Yes, there she is. Empress Elizabeth, also known as Sisi of Austria, a very, very beautiful woman, was stabbed to death outside of a theater by an Italian anarchist carrying a sharpened file used for filing down metal. Going back to the presentation, though, Alexander II had 3 bombs thrown at him, and his carriage was blown up, and he was riding in a carriage that was bulletproof that was given to him by Napoleon III, the former leader of France. So, like, everybody's being assassinated, okay? So when we get to the assassination of Franz Ferdinand later, let's not pretend like Europe didn't, like, have this stuff happening all the time. Like, I mean, like, it was a very much a lot of other things that led to World War I, not just that one guy getting shot. All right, so anyway, also there was a huge amount. Remember when I said like violence against your enemies or resentment against your enemies? You had a huge growth in anti-Semitic activity. It's not like Europe all of a sudden started disliking the Jewish community in World War II. Let's not be obnoxious here, right? This is something that's been growing for a long time. The Russians had these things called pogroms, where they were literally ousting Jewish people out of villages in the countryside of Russia. They had, like, this guy over here, Alfred Dreyfus, a French military officer, was put on trial for espionage or crimes against his state. Turns out that all the evidence was fake. The military just wanted to get rid of him because he was Jewish, and he knew that the military knew that he would make an easy target. So, like, as you can see, this stuff is crazy. And then also, imperialist Europe is literally killing native people in massive numbers in places like Africa and Asia. So let's not be obnoxious and act like violence wasn't a thing going into 19th or going into 20th century Europe. Like this very, very, very famous quote, or like this famous quote that I'm a little baby poem I'm about to say to you, is all about this weapon that has now made its debut onto the scene. This is another big scary thing about science, right? With Marie Curie and Albert Einstein and people like Freud changing the way you think about science, that's going to make everything better in a sense because we understand the world now, but if you understand the world and physics better, that means you can make weapons that are more efficient at killing people. That's a Maxim gun right there. That Maxim gun fires 600 rounds per minute. Right? We talked about this with the imperialists. And there's an old like poem that goes along with this it was written by a British author, and he says, "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. And in this poem, he's basically saying we can take over anywhere in Africa and Asia because we can just kill large numbers of people without even, like, flicking a wrist, right? Like, so, like, violence it's growing. And there are, like, four, actually, we're going to go ahead and skip these guys, okay? We're going to skip those guys real quick. And you got to understand that World War I, like, was going to happen. Like, it was on its way. Now, many historians will tell you that nothing is truly inevitable. If we saw a war like this coming now, we would hope that after studying history for long enough that we could prevent it, because that's the big thing, is, like, I know everybody's like, well, we don't want to prevent our mistakes. Like, they're going to happen sometimes, and it's more about preparation and analysis and understanding why they happen when you study history. But, like, this is a particular little situation where it's like we can kind of see with this war the dangers of, you know, militarism, imperialism, and nationalism, and we can see how the subjugation of other people leads to violence. So how can we better avoid these things? We can do that by studying this, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a simple outline of World War I, okay? So in your notes, you should not have written MAIN yet because we're not there. That's the causes of the war. We're going to get into that later. But what I want to get into now is a completely separate area of your notes. So I'm going to roll up a little section right now for you of credits-looking stuff of how I want your outline to look in your notes, okay? And it's going on the screen right now. And, of course, you can see it says World War I mini outline, okay? And we're going to go with the years it lasted, okay? We're going to go with the Central Powers, the Allies, and I'm going to put on there how many spaces to leave. And then we're going to go with the three, or we go, what are we going with? One, two, and we're going to go with the two major themes of this war getting into it, okay? Two major themes. Got it. All right, so let's go ahead and start going over that outline real quick. But as you can see, World War I, at the time during the early 1900s, was known as the Great War. So in your little mini outline, this war is going to last from the years of 1914 to 1918. Now, we are going to go backwards off of this outline. This outline should be like a little box, a little square in your notes to kind of just be a little like cheat sheet so you can look back at it at any point just so you can know, okay? So this war is going to last from 1914 to 1918, but of course it had a massive amount of causes that actually led up to it. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and go over some of the big groups involved, all right? Because whenever you're talking about a war, you need to talk about like, oh, it's this team versus this team, right? So we're going to talk about one team first, and then we're going to talk about how their alliance system was built, and we're going to talk about the other team, we're going to talk about how their alliance system was built, and all this other stuff. But the first guys we're talking about are these four particular men right here. Now, three of them are very important, and the other one I'm never even going to talk about. And I'm just going to be upfront and honest with you, and it's not because he's not important. It's just because in a survey Western Civ course, I'm just not going to bring them up. All right? So anyway, now, so these are the Central Powers, all right? So the Central Powers is going to be the group that if you want some kind of context, the United States will fight against, okay? So the United States was in a group known as the Allies. The Central Powers were the group that we were fighting against in World War I, okay? So, again, we're just outlining World War I. We're just making sure you know who's who, where's what, all this other stuff. And the countries involved in the Central Powers in World War I were the German Empire, is what they were called, the Austria-Hungary Empire, or Austria-Hungary, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, okay? And then there's the Ottoman Empire. Now, there's a reason why I put them up there in that order. These two, write this down next to the Ottoman Empire's name. These two were an early alliance. These guys showed up later, okay? They showed up later in, I believe, 1915. Let me double check that. When did the Ottoman Empire join World War I? Anyway, oh, no, 1914. So October 29, 1914. So they're going to come in a little bit later, though, after the war kind of starts progressing. And then the German Empire and the Austro-Hungarians, though, are a very close alliance. So the guys that we have pictured right here are very important, okay? The first one, the most important one out of the Central Powers, is the leader of Germany. And he is Kaiser Wilhelm II, okay? He is from the Hohenzollern family. Hohenzollern. All right, so yeah, he's a Hohenzollern, okay? And Kaiser Wilhelm is a very, very important figure, okay? Kaiser Wilhelm's the guy that Mr. Terry doesn't like because he pretty much directly starts World War I, and he also is just a very odd character. He fired Bismarck whenever they first got involved. He also, like, one really little weird thing about him, he has a dead arm. His left arm, okay, this arm right here, hangs dead at his side. He can't use it because when he was being born as a child, we believe that there's a chance that the umbilical cord got wrapped around his shoulder, and when they were pulling him out, there was a lot of nerve damage right here in his shoulder. And they did a lot of crazy things like poking red-hot needles into it and soaking it in ice and trying to do all this stuff to get him any kind of feeling in it. But it just kind of hung there loosely at his side. And all of the pictures that he ever took, it was either stuck in a pocket or resting on a sword. And so that's just a funny little thing about him. But he was a very, very, very arrogant person. He used to love to watch the news to see what they said about him. But he's a very, very odd bird, just to give you a heads up. And he was one of the guys that is going to be welcoming this war. Like, he wants to start this war because he wants to make a legacy for himself. And then we have another guy, Franz Joseph. Now, Franz Joseph is a Habsburg, okay? And he is from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, okay? He's the leader of Austria-Hungary. The lady that I showed you that got stabbed with the file, that was his wife, all right? So Franz Joseph is going to be the formal leader of Austria during World War I. I've been to both of his houses. I've been to the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, and I've also been to the palace in Budapest. So getting into it, though, or the Buda Castle. So this right here, Franz Joseph, is going to be the leader of the Austro-Hungarians. Not a lot to say about him. He does die going through the war, actually. He's a much older man. The much more important person is his nephew, Franz Ferdinand, who is this cat right here. Now, he's going to be a majorly important figure that I just need you to put a star next to him because I need you to know that he was second in line for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but some stuff happens, okay? So we're going to get into that a little bit more. But you just need to know that Franz Ferdinand is Franz Joseph's nephew, second in line for the Austrian throne, okay? And then you've got the last guy, and this is Mehmed V. He is the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He is of Arabic descent, kind of. He's Turkish, all right? So, because it's like, does Turkey start or end in Europe? None of us know. Anyway, but those are the Central Powers figures, okay? Now, your allies are all these guys, okay? Now, let's go ahead and get one out of the way. The United States, okay? The United States does not get involved until 1917, okay? We declared ourselves neutral for the bulk of the war. We didn't get involved really until the last year. So this is another reason why a lot of us believe that World War I is kind of not in the forefront of Americans' minds because we're not heavily involved. We did kind of come in and give like the final kill stroke to the Central Powers leading into the victory. However, we did not get involved until 1917, okay? So make sure you jot that down. Then you also have France. Then you have Great Britain, and you got Russia, okay? So let's go ahead and go over these guys. This one from the United States is very important. Woodrow Wilson, okay? Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States during World War I. France's guys, Poincaré and Clemenceau, I'm barely going to talk about. Like, barely. Barely. You will not need to know them for the matching section of the test. You can go ahead and jot them down if you want, but they don't need any underlines, no circles, no nothing. Like, if I had to go back right now to the Central Powers, notice that Franz Joseph, Franz Ferdinand, and Kaiser Wilhelm II are all in red. They need to be circled, okay? But kind of like Mehmed V from the Ottoman Empire, the French guys of Poincaré and Clemenceau do not need to be circled, okay? But then you got two very, very big ones. You got the Russians and the British, okay? And the British, you got George V, who is their king, and then you got Tsar Nicholas II, who is their leader. Now, ironically enough, George V is kind of more of a figurehead than he is anything. What you really need to write down for under Great Britain as well, go ahead and write this guy, actually, David Lloyd George. David Lloyd George is going to be, here he is. David Lloyd George is going to be the British Prime Minister during World War I, okay? So he is the British Prime Minister during World War I. So you do need to write him down for Britain. I'm sorry I forgot to put him in there. Now, funny thing about these guys, though. Let's take a little gander at these two real quick. Yes, creepy. Why do they look so much alike? All right, well, because this is just another little trait of this World War I craziness going on. just to give you a heads up, this is the Central Powers fighting against the Allies in World War I. These are the people that are going to be going against the Allies in World War I, and this all just goes in your little outline, right? Queen Victoria was the leader of of England from the early 1800s until 1901, I believe is the year that she died. This guy, and this guy are all her grandsons, which means they're all related. These three dudes are cousins. This war could have been avoided so easily based just on family lineage, but it still blew up and claimed the lives of 40 million people regardless, all right? So that's absolutely crazy. They look a lot alike because they're related, all right? So most of your leaders of Europe are very close or related a couple of generations down. This is a very, very crazy little thing that's about to erupt. Now, going back to our last little stuff, though, now we just got to talk about a couple of the main themes of World War I. There are two particular themes of World War I that you need to know that'll be kind of a guiding light through this entire unit. And that's the first and foremost is the style of warfare that it's best known for. World War I is best known as a trench war, or trench warfare was the thing that would end up defining it as a war. It was mostly fought inside of these ditches, opposite ends of a place called No Man's Land, and it would be like your trench is right here, and then about 100 yards this way is another set of trenches where the enemy was, and that's on the Western Front that they're going to be doing that. Shout out to the Honors Kids, All Quiet on the Western Front, great book. And then you also have the birth of new weaponry and scientific advancement, okay? So you're going to see a massive growth in weaponry that the world was not ready to fight wars with yet. That's the second theme, okay? So your first theme is going to be trench warfare. Your second theme is going to be massive advancements in military technology. That's going to be what we're looking for right there. So trench warfare and massive advancements in military technology. Things like the Maxim gun and poison gas are going to be major thematic things in this war, okay? So that's from break. I hope y'all have had a fantastic break, and I'll see you guys soon. Y'all have a great one.